Hello and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Show. My name's Lorne Wisely and I'm going to be your host for this episode, and we're starting to see a theme here, aren't we? Positive game review, negative game review, positive game review, sort of negative game review. Sort of in the sense that my production quality still needs to be a little bit up, but what can you expect when a new ruler takes over? So with considering the checkered pattern that we seem to be following here, let's try not to be sour. Clap for your reigning, undisputed, undefeated, unquestionable king of YouTube content creation, and feel the power! But anyway, let's talk about MOK, Super Space Taxi, an indie game from Steam from the creative mind of Marc Grabow and 42 Bytes Games. What is this game? Well, it's a platformer of sorts, but it's a kind of a casual traversing game. Basically, the idea is that you play as MOK, a little alien dude who has a space taxi. You need to pick up other aliens, or dudes as they're referenced in this game. Released on the 13th of June 2019 and currently sitting at Steam for a retail price of $3.99 or $6. Help the little alien MOK control a fragile spaceship in a game about exploring hand-drawn planets and picking up friends. Be quick, but be careful as you tap your way through sketchy caverns, putting your skills to the test and collecting extraterrestrial travelers along the way. Yeah, pretty accurate. It also mentions the fact that you've got 5 worlds to master, kind of similar to the layout of the old school Mario games. Multiple levels within a single world. You complete the world, you move on to the next world. I actually really like this game. It's got its problems, it's got its fair share of issues. It's not the best game to play in the world, but there's something undeniably charming and quirky about this game. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of it, shall we? Marc Grabow, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, messaged me back with regards to a couple of queries and mentioned that this was the first game he ever put into development. And one of his defining characteristics of developing this game was that he wanted everything to have a handmade, hand feel. So he hand drew everything and hand animated everything, and that is something that I really appreciated once I'd you can kind of get the aesthetic, but the fact that everything that you see in this game has been put together by this gentleman is a wonderful statement of the amount of passion that must have gone into this game. And in fact, this was the first game he, as I mentioned before, the first game he ever developed as a whole. So not only did he have to draw, animate, put everything together, conceptualize everything, he then had to learn how to program everything and get it all together working and functioning correctly. And judging by what his response was, he says he has a bunch of other games that are sitting in a kind of a limbo state of development where they're nearly done, not quite over the line. So he's hoping that this will obviously propel him to bigger things down the line, along with other games that he then produces. And if this game is anything to go by, this guy has some talent and a promising eye for detail that we're going to get into a little bit more in just a second. But let's kick off. What does the game have to offer? You've got 5 different planets to explore, as referenced before. You've got 45 levels within those 5 planets that you have to traverse and collect dudes. You have 30 dude characters that you can collect and unlock as you progress through the game. And again, the game has a simplistic hand-drawn sketch graphic motif that is in every facet of this game. It's also fair to say, I think, that this game is aimed at a younger audience, considering that its design, its sound effects, its overall gameplay difficulty, a lot of aspects seem to be geared towards a much more either innocent or younger audience, considering that it's black and white. The only other color scheme that you see is a light green color for the menu button and the red for the flames of the rocket ship or spacecraft that you're going to be using to traverse these levels. So how does the game feel, first of all? Well, I will admit, the game's controls do take some getting used to, because it does have a bit of a jarry feel to it. It could have been much more smoother and much more responsive, considering, again, things like, for instance, the game that I will most directly compare this to in terms of its control, Power Gunner. It just, it doesn't feel as smooth as Power Gunner does, and it could do with some tweaking. It's also a challenge because the boosters that you use so you can use a number of different figures. I prefer to stick to the mouse to direct. It just means that you can be a lot more precise, and you can be less generous with the fuel. We'll get to why in a minute, but it feels a little bit numb, and I feel that Power Gunner had a superior system despite having its own problems. The other issue that I noticed initially, at least, is that the game auto defaults to the inverted controls, which if I were you, I'd turn off straight away. The inverted controls, unless you like inverted controls, the inverted controls just make it way too hard to navigate initially, and you'll find yourself crashing and burning an awful lot. I also suggest that you need to be frugal with fuel in the initial stages to get used to that, because in the later levels, it becomes more and more important to ration your fuel as the level progresses, because the more dudes you collect, the more places you've got to get to, and obviously, if you just blast the fuel everywhere, you're going to run out and crash and burn in the level ends if you do run out of fuel. Something else to bear in mind with the game is collecting the dudes. Basically, the idea is that you've got to sort of line up, land, let the dude get in, and then move on to the next one, or indeed, if that completes the level, that completes the level. On some occasions, though, if you don't land the way the game wants you to land on the dude, it doesn't collect, which means that you'll sit there kind of waiting for something to happen and then nothing does, so you have to kind of readjust and re-angle, which damages your ship. Now this can feel a little bit cheap sometimes because of course it's not your fault that you've landed, you're there. There's a couple of dudes, for instance, that are placed on the top of a peak, which means that your spaceship will invariably kind of lean and then fall, and it feels like it needs you to be more precise than you can be with the control scheme that's available to you here. And in terms of glitches, bugs, or otherwise issues with the game, there's nothing too unstable about the game. The only two issues, as I mentioned before, are the dudes collecting them. Sometimes it can feel impossible unless you just fluke it. And there are some elements to levels that mean that you can get stuck. One in particular I remember in the early stages, towards the left-hand side of the map, there's a dude, you can collect it, but then you shoot up, there's like a little pop cavern thing that you can get stuck into and with no way of getting out. No amount of boosting or moving around is going to change anything, so you can get stuck. So clearly some of the level design needs to be tweaked and worked on just to avoid that sort of thing going in the future, because it can be frustrating at times. In terms of the interface, the UI is easily accessible, reasonably easy to read. The only issue I have with the game's design is the fuel cells that you collect to replenish your fuel just kind of blend into the background. I get that this probably is part of the challenge of the game, but considering the lack of color, it's a prime example of something that you could have used to just like a blue or a green or a yellow, just to make it pop a little bit more and add some color to the game, which is otherwise devoid of it. It matches the aesthetic, I'll grant you that, but I would just prefer to be able to locate the fuel cells a bit more easily to make my gameplay experience more enjoyable. The menus are easy to operate, very responsive, no issues, bugs or glitches in navigating those, and there's even a menu for the developer, which is helpful because it gives you the website, his Twitter details, and other access to his other games, so that's nice for me as a reviewer to be able to locate those details easily, and for a gamer I understand this is probably not important, but it's a nice little touch, and again shows that the developer put a lot of effort and passion into this project. In terms of the story and characters, not really a story or narrative here. You obviously progress through the levels as MOK, the super space taxi driver, collecting dudes and just trying to make it to the end of each level. Simple enough premise, but it's quirky in its own way with the voice acting, the overall aesthetic, and just little touches that the developer adds to kind of let you know that he's thought about each stage of the game. You have to collect all the dudes in every level with a certain amount of time, and you've got to try and avoid running out of fuel, which I've referenced earlier on. You've got to avoid crashing your ship as well, because the only other thing that I would advise maybe tweaking this game is that the damage is inconsistent. Sometimes it feels like you do tons of damage, sometimes you feel like you do none. The hit detection needs a little bit work too, and I would argue that you shouldn't accrue damage by landing. Again, because of the dude issue earlier on collecting the dudes, you feel like you accrue most of your damage just collecting them, which shouldn't be part of the game. Surely, you know, most spaceships, if you built them, would have that sort of landing gear or a plate or a sort of a suck-up tractor beam thing that, again, Power Gunner probably does a little bit better, considering that it too doesn't want you sitting on the ground because it will accumulate damage. In terms of gameplay, again, it's not the strongest, but there are some nice touches. For instance, each level does have a unique feel to it. The earlier levels feel super easy, the later levels feel much more intricate, and it gives you plenty of time to learn, to get to grips with its learning curve. There are also some other little helps. For instance, every dude you collect has a little marker that points towards them. The nearest one will appear around the spaceship as you traverse it, which means that potentially once you get used to a level but maybe you've struggled on it a little bit, you can tweak which dude you collect at which point, and it will always give you a general direction of where the dude is without obviously giving you the directions of how to get there specifically. So the way I'd coach people through this game is simple. In the early stages, it's just important to get to grips with the feel of the ship. How much boost you need to give to move in a general direction, how much to move up and down, and how much to brake, etc., etc. Towards the middle levels, it's about rationing out that fuel, making sure you get good at that. And then towards the latter levels, just making sure you're steering clear of any walls, any bases, anything along those lines that might accrue damage, because it kind of weans you off one to the other, and it places a different importance depending on the level that you're in. But generally speaking, this game is reasonably straightforward to pick up and play, reasonably straightforward to get to grips with its control scheme once you take into account its relative, its lack of sharpness. I'm not saying it's numb necessarily, but it could do with sharpening up just a little bit. But considering that the levels are designed somewhat like mazes, it's a welcome change of pace from other ship-related games, and more to the point, it does feel like a challenge, but not an easy one, not a hard one, an attainable challenge nonetheless. The only thing I'd probably add, and this is just again a personal preference, is health packs. Again, for those moments where you're dragging your ass along the floor, it'd be nice to have something just to boost you up just a little bit and get you through the rest of the level without having to crash and burn, because one of the things that you'll find is that when you do crash and burn, the repair animation, while it's really nice, and actually really appreciate the fact that you took the time to animate that and put it together as just, again, a little quirky thing, the load time is a little bit, it takes you out of the experience just a little bit. It takes a little bit too long to load for my taste, but it does, again, illuminate the fact that he's put time and effort into animating that little transition between when you crash, and obviously he goes flying out of the spaceship, and as you accrue damage, the spaceship gets cracks and dents and things of that nature. But despite the relatively simplistic design, you can tell that a tremendous amount of thought and effort's been put into even that aspect of the game, which is really nice to see. So again, I think some of the things that I would change for future installments is I'd incorporate a couple of different modes, maybe a time trial mode, just to get used to the navigation element. I'd also, again, change the color of the fuel cells just to make them a bit easier to distinguish, and I'd also tighten up the gameplay just a little bit more. The fuel, for instance, feels, again, inconsistent. The hit detection feels a little bit inconsistent. Again, considering this is a first effort, I'm not going to give the game too much crap for that, but it does need to be said that those two things need tweaking just a little bit to make it feel not less, obviously, if you get damage, you get damage, but more consistent and more like it makes sense within the context of the hit that you just took or the amount of boost that you've just used with your fuel. So now let's talk about the game's main strength, its quirkiness and its overall aesthetic design, which I really like. I love the art style, I love the quirkiness, I love how everything is hand-drawn and hand-animated and voice-acted by basically one guy, and it's clearly a passion project, as demonstrated by my chat with the developer himself. And it may go some way into explaining some of the numbness in the gameplay, because basically he's had to cobble everything together while learning to develop at the same time, and these hand-drawn elements might not lend themselves that well to be conducive to the sharpest gameplay ever. So in compromising the gameplay to go for a unique look, I can certainly appreciate and understand that. And the music too is fitting. It's kind of like what I imagine the minions listen to when they're smoking the stickiest of the eke. And the voice acting as well, while it's silly and over the top and a bit quirky, like, hey, how you doing, buddy? I like it. It suits the overall aesthetic and the presentation of the game. And just coming back to those animations, it's a bit stop motion, but I like that. And the fact that they've thought to include them is a wonderful little touch that I've criticised other games in the past for doing, just that little bit of extra production and thought into the experience of the game, not necessarily just the gameplay of the game. Clearly with one person it's difficult to then add that into the gameplay, which is where some games benefit because they've got talented programmers and talented developers, but maybe people that lack that little bit of artistic creativity that sets games with good presentation apart from ones that just have serviceable presentation. This game, its presentation is at the fore, and it's the main thing that's going to keep you coming back to this game in terms of an enjoyable experience, is just how fun it is to look at. And so to summarize, well, what do I think some of the best-selling points of this game are? Well, the gameplay is not by no means unique, but it's a game that oozes charm, and I can't deny that given the depth of passion that's on display here, that he's created something that I feel stands out. The repair animations, again, are a nice touch. The little exchanges between MOK and his passengers when they enter the ship. The music and the collection of unlockable dudes is a nice little progression tip. It doesn't mean much within the context of the game. There's no customization. You can't swap MOK out for another character. You can't have these characters join him. There's no banter back and forth beyond picking up. But it's a good game, and a game that I would argue is probably greater than the sum of its parts. Not only that, it's a really good chill-out game. There's no stress attached to this game at all. Even when the ship does break, you just get a repaired new one anyway. And more to the point, there's no, it's a very soothing experience, the music is very subdued, the characters don't jump, scream and blah blah blah, it's just an overall very chilled experience. A good game for people that are looking for a neat distraction from maybe other games, that, you know, that meme on Facebook where it's, oh, I have a game to play as a break to my other games. This is one of those games that you would probably play on your break. It's simple to play it for 10-15 minute sessions. It's a smile on your face situation. It's got unlockable, so you constantly feel like what you're doing matters and you're achieving more and more. And overall, it's just a very basic, I'll grant you, but well put together experience, and one that I'd recommend to pretty much anybody. With the small caveat, it is kind of expensive for what it is. I understand that the hand-drawn animations and stuff took a lot of time and effort. I also understand that learning to develop your first game is tricky, and amalgamating those two things can't have been an easy endeavor. But for £4 compared to other games that you can get on Steam, it seems a little bit expensive for what it is for an indie game. So I'd recommend probably waiting for a price reduction before you go out and pick up this game, just because I don't know if it's necessarily worth that price point. You'd have to be the judge for yourself based on the gameplay footage that's available on YouTube at the moment. But it's certainly worth a look, and I would definitely recommend it to people, if nothing else because of that aesthetic, but also because, again, it's an easy experience to be able to digest and kind of unwind to playing at the end of each day.
Dear God, it's beautiful.
So, MOK, the Super Space Taxi. Have you played it? What did you think about it? Or indeed, have you played any other spacefaring platforms? Did you manage to play Power Gunner yet? Have you had a chance to get some hands on with that? What did you think? Because I'm interested to see the comparison between these two games from other people's perspective, considering that there's no combat element to this game, there's no high score level element to this game beyond obviously what you score per level. I'm interested to see what people think. What do you think in the comment section below? But thank you very much for watching this episode of The Halcyon Show. Please like, share and subscribe. Check out some of the other content that I've been producing recently. I'm going to aim to try and do at least a couple of videos a week going forward for indie games, and then obviously the top 5s and other videos as and when they become relevant. Go check me out over at Defunct Games channel. We recently did our first review, not a let's play. I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call it a let's play.
Mention my name, he tweets. Oh, rude boy, shut up.
Yeah, he corrected me and said that I called it a let's play, and it's not a let's play. He actually reviewed it and played the whole game through. It wasn't an impression video or anything like that. He's played it through. It's an impression for me, and that's why I made the assumption, because I'm allowed to get away with making mistakes like that. I'm the king, and I have all the power, and don't you dare be sour. Clap for the greatest reviewer there's ever been, and feel... Wait a minute, did we do this joke earlier? I feel like we did this joke earlier. But oh well. What? It's like you've never seen a grown man dance to the New Day before. You've all done it. Don't lie to yourselves. In the meantime though, thank you very much for watching once again. By all means, follow me on Twitter, @LorneRisley, and keep your eyes peeled for anything else that I'm posting in the future. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys in the next episode of The Halcyon Show.